There is something unsettling, something almost terrifying, about the kind of silence that surrounds an INFJ after they have walked through their personal darkness, because it is not the silence of defeat or despair, but the silence of someone who has tasted shadows so raw and so merciless that the rest of the world will never be able to fully imagine the scars left behind. And yet, those scars are not the marks of weakness, but the proof of rebirth, the undeniable evidence that the INFJ has survived what was meant to break them and has instead been reforged into something infinitely more dangerous, more untouchable, and more extraordinary than they ever were before. And in that transformation, something shifts. The INFJ you once knew, the quiet dreamer, the selfless healer, the one who carried other people's burdens like a saint, dies in the fire of betrayal, abandonment, and inner chaos. What emerges is different. What emerges is not a victim, not even a survivor. What emerges is someone who is more than human in their resilience, someone who carries the weight of darkness but wears it as armor, someone who has stared into the abyss and found not fear, but power. This is the INFJ after the darkness. And today, I am going to take you deep into the transformation, into the hauntingly beautiful metamorphosis of who the INFJ becomes when life's cruelties push them so far into despair that the only choice left is to rise or to die within themselves. So brace yourself, because this is not going to be lighthearted. This is going to be raw, this is going to be heavy, and this is going to be real. 1. The INFJ who trusted too much learns the power of withdrawal. Once, the INFJ gave everything. They trusted with an open heart, they offered love without conditions, and they extended second chances that the world did not deserve. But after darkness, after betrayal, after endless cycles of being drained and abandoned, something irreversible happens inside them. The INFJ learns the ruthless necessity of withdrawal. And this is not the same as shutting down or becoming cold. It is the sacred reclaiming of energy, the silent recognition that their soul is not a public resource, and that their trust is no longer something handed out like water to the thirsty. It is now guarded, rare, and terrifyingly powerful. When the INFJ withdraws, it unsettles people, because those who once fed off their kindness suddenly starve in their absence. And while the world may call this selfishness, in reality it is one of the most empowering transformations an INFJ undergoes after surviving darkness. They finally choose themselves over everyone else. 2. The empath becomes the strategist. INFJs are born empaths, naturally tuned into every whisper of emotion in the room, every unspoken ache behind someone's eyes. But when they are dragged through darkness, betrayal, gaslighting, manipulation, they begin to see patterns. They realize that their empathy was not just a gift, it was also a weapon used against them by those who wanted to control or consume their energy. And so, the INFJ shifts. No longer a naive empath, they become the strategist, the one who doesn't just feel but also calculates, the one who can read motives with surgical precision, the one who can detect deceit before a single word is spoken. This strategic transformation makes them dangerous in the eyes of manipulators, because the INFJ is no longer the prey. They are now the hunter of truth, the one who cannot be deceived, the one who sees through illusions with almost frightening clarity. 3. The idealist is replaced by the realist. Once, the INFJ lived with ideals so pure it broke them. They believed in unconditional loyalty, in people's potential, in the hope that love and kindness could heal anyone. But after walking through the darkness, after watching people prove again and again that they would choose selfishness over integrity, the INFJ lets the idealist part of themselves die. What rises in its place is a hard-edged realist, someone who no longer wastes years waiting for people to change, someone who no longer gives their energy to fixing others, someone who finally accepts that not everyone wants healing, not everyone deserves access, and not everyone can be saved. And while this shift can make the INFJ appear colder, It is in truth the exact medicine their soul needed. Because the realist INFJ is no longer consumed by impossible expectations, they are freed by the clarity of reality. 4. The voiceless becomes the unapologetic truth teller. Before the darkness, INFJs often swallowed their words, silenced their needs, and buried their pain in order to keep the peace. They feared confrontation, they feared hurting others, and so they carried the weight alone. But when the darkness strips them of everything, when silence becomes suffocating, the INFJ breaks, and from that breaking comes a voice they never knew they had. This new voice is not soft. It is sharp, it is raw, it is unapologetically honest. They no longer bite their tongue to avoid upsetting fragile egos, they no longer lie to themselves to keep toxic bonds alive. They speak their truth with the authority of someone who has lost everything before and is no longer afraid to lose again. This makes them dangerous, because their words are not just words, they are revelations, cutting through denial and exposing reality with terrifying precision. 5. The giver becomes the guardian. INFJs are natural givers. They pour themselves into relationships, projects, and causes until there is nothing left. But when they are left empty, when the darkness takes everything from them, something profound happens. They finally become the guardian of their own soul. They build boundaries like fortresses, they become selective in ways that confuse people, and they no longer apologize for protecting their energy. This is not bitterness, this is survival, and it is also wisdom, because the INFJ has finally understood that you cannot save the world if you keep bleeding out for people who secretly hope you'll collapse. The guardian INFJ is formidable, because they still care deeply, but their care is no longer indiscriminate, it is directed, precise, and fiercely protected. 6. The INFJ WHO feared darkness becomes the master of IT. Here is where it gets deep, perhaps deeper than most can handle. Once upon a time, the INFJ feared their own shadows. They feared anger, they feared bitterness, they feared becoming the very darkness they saw in others. But when they are forced into the abyss, when they are abandoned in the cold silence of betrayal, they are introduced to their own darkness face to face, and instead of being destroyed by it, they learn to master it. This is the most dangerous transformation of all. Because now the INFJ can walk in both light and shadow. They can hold compassion in one hand and wrath in the other. They can forgive, but they can also cut ties without hesitation. They are no longer ruled by the fear of their own complexity, they wield it like a blade. This duality makes them powerful in a way that unnerves others, because you never know which side of them you are standing in front of, the healer or the destroyer. And once an INFJ has mastered their darkness, they are truly unstoppable. 7. The lonely one becomes the untouchable one. Before the darkness, the INFJ feared loneliness, feared being misunderstood, feared being isolated from the world. They craved connection, even if it meant sacrificing parts of themselves to maintain it. But after surviving the loneliness of betrayal and abandonment, something irreversible happens. The INFJ no longer fears being alone. And when you do not fear loneliness, you become untouchable. The INFJ who has walked through darkness realizes that solitude is not emptiness, it is power. They learn to thrive in their own company, to draw strength from silence, to create worlds within themselves that no one else can access. And once they embrace this, they stop chasing validation, they stop begging for understanding, they stop shrinking themselves just to belong. This untouchable INFJ is free, and nothing terrifies the world more than a free INFJ who no longer needs it. 8. They become masters of emotional alchemy. There is a stage after darkness where emotions no longer hold the same power over the INFJ. Before, pain could drown them. Heartbreak could shatter them. Betrayal could silence them. But when they rise from the ashes of their suffering, they discover that emotions are no longer things that consume them. They're tools they can wield. It is a kind of emotional alchemy, the ability to take despair and transmute it into strength, to take grief and transform it into depth, to take rage and redirect it into clarity. This is dangerous to those who once used the INFJ's feelings against them. Because now, what once crippled the INFJ is fuel. Their sorrow becomes wisdom. Their anger becomes strategy. Their grief becomes empathy sharpened into intuition. When others are lost inside their emotions, the INFJ knows how to step back, observe, and master the very currents that used to overwhelm them. This emotional alchemy is part of why people find INFJs intimidating after their darkest moments, because nothing can weaponize them anymore. 9. They develop a relentless boundaries system. The INFJ who has been to hell and back does not let anyone walk past their thresholds again without careful evaluation. They may have once allowed toxic people to drain them, manipulators to trick them, or abusers to control them. But the INFJ who has survived darkness has built a fortress of boundaries. These boundaries are not walls meant to keep love out, but gates that require truth, respect, and authenticity to enter. And when these boundaries are crossed, the INFJ no longer hesitates. They cut, they withdraw, they sever ties with the precision of someone who understands the cost of keeping poison in their life. They do not apologize for this anymore. They do not explain. They simply act. And this decisiveness, this unflinching commitment to self-protection, is terrifying to those who still expect the INFJ to bend and break for them. The INFJ has learned that their soul is not expendable. Their time is not disposable. Their love is not a resource to be squandered. 10. They radiate an aura of untouchable depth. Darkness leaves scars, but it also leaves something else, an aura. The INFJ who has survived deep pain carries an atmosphere around them that can be felt before a word is spoken. It is the weight of someone who has seen death in the eyes of dreams, who has felt the shattering of identity, who has walked through corridors of despair and returned. This aura makes others pause. It makes shallow conversations feel insulting, makes false masks seem grotesque in comparison. And while some may be drawn to this aura like moths to flame, others are repelled by it, because it reflects back their own emptiness. This is why INFJs, after surviving darkness, are often accused of being intimidating, too intense, or hard to approach. What they don't realize is that this aura is not created for intimidation. It is simply the residue of authenticity that comes from having survived and chosen truth over illusion. 11. They stop chasing belonging. Perhaps one of the most liberating transformations of all, after the darkness, INFJs no longer ache for belonging in the way they once did. Before, they may have bent themselves into pretzels, softened their edges, dulled their colors, all in a desperate attempt to belong somewhere, anywhere. But the crucible of isolation teaches them a devastatingly beautiful truth. Belonging does not come from being accepted by others, it comes from refusing to abandon yourself. The INFJ who survives darkness understands that solitude is not punishment, it is power. They may still feel the pang of loneliness, but it no longer destroys them. In fact, they become more dangerous precisely because they are no longer enslaved by the need to be liked, understood, or included. They belong to themselves first, and in that sovereignty, they become unshakable. 12. They see through illusions with razor-sharp clarity. Darkness trains the INFJ's perception like nothing else. Having been manipulated, betrayed, or abandoned, they learn to see patterns others miss. They notice the subtle changes in tone, the flicker in someone's eyes, the energy behind words that do not match. And because they have already been deceived, they are not afraid to call it out, or at the very least, to remove themselves before the poison takes root again. This clarity becomes unsettling to others, because INFJs don't just read actions, they read intentions. They can spot hypocrisy buried beneath charm, or cruelty dressed in kindness. And once you have seen the face behind the mask, you cannot be fooled again. That's why the INFJ who has walked through the valley of darkness is nearly impossible to manipulate. They've learned to see truth without asking permission. 13. They become unapologetic truth tellers. The INFJ's voice, once silenced by fear of rejection or the weight of expectations, becomes razor-sharp after surviving darkness. They no longer dilute their truths to keep the peace. They no longer whisper their insights only to those who are ready to hear them. Instead, they speak with a rawness and clarity that shakes people awake. Of course, this can make others uncomfortable, because truth is rarely convenient, and INFJs are not afraid to expose it when it matters most. The INFJ after darkness knows that silence is complicity, and they have no desire to play small anymore. They have walked through too much shadow to ever betray their own light again. Their truth may sting, but it saves. And for those who can't handle it, the INFJ doesn't care anymore. They were not meant to carry fragile egos on their back. 14. They transform into silent revolutionaries. The final stage of the INFJ after surviving darkness is not loud, not chaotic, not theatrical. It is quiet. It is deliberate. It is revolutionary. They stop needing recognition, validation, or applause. Instead, they move through the world like shadows, creating waves of change without needing credit. They influence lives not through force, but through presence, through depth, through the silent ways they plant seeds in others' souls. This is why INFJs are underestimated, because their revolution is invisible until it has already taken root. But the INFJ who has survived darkness knows that true power does not need to announce itself. True power simply exists, silently reshaping everything around it. And that is who the INFJ becomes, a living paradox of gentleness and danger, softness and steel, compassion and fury. They carry the shadows with them, not as chains, but as weapons forged from their own survival. When an INFJ survives darkness, they do not simply return to the person they once were. They become someone entirely new. The scars remain, but they are not weaknesses. They are maps of where they have been and warnings of what they will never allow again. They are not broken, they are rebuilt. They are not victims, they are survivors. And they are not fragile, they are dangerous in the most beautiful sense of the word, because nothing is more dangerous than someone who has suffered deeply and chosen to rise anyway. The INFJ after darkness becomes the phoenix, a soul reborn in fire, winged with resilience, and crowned with a wisdom that only comes from surviving hell and refusing to stay there. They are no longer afraid of the shadows, because they carry light within them that no one can extinguish. And that is their power. That is their danger. And that is why the world will never forget them.